welcome to the Art of Franchise Marketing. Each episode takes a deep dive into the franchise space and explores how the biggest and best brands handle national branding, franchise development, employee recruitment, and localized marketing on a daily basis. This podcast is brought to you by NetSertive, a localized digital marketing partner for franchise networks. NetSertive talks shop with franchise executives to discuss what's working, what's not, and answers the question, what else can you be doing to excel at the art of franchise marketing?
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Franchise Marketing podcast. I'm your host, Erin Martin, and this episode is brought to you by NetSertive. Today, we welcome Burke Cuny. He's the Executive Vice President at Alliance Franchise Brands, which is a leader in the marketing, print, and graphics communication services with a family of brands that represent over 600 locations in North America and includes some of those like Allegra Marketing, Print Mail, Image 360, Signs Now, Signs by Tomorrow, and more. Thanks for joining us, Burke.
It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me on your podcast, Erin.
Absolutely. We're really excited to have you join. And to kick things off, could you just give our listeners a little bit more of background about your role at Alliance Franchise Brands and what you oversee there?
Sure. So I came to Alliance Franchise Brands just a bit over 9 years ago, came to work in what was then called the Sign and Graphics division of Alliance Franchise Brands based out in Middle River, Maryland. And so I oversaw the marketing. So I was VP of marketing for Signs by Tomorrow, Signs Now, and Image 360. So held that role for probably around 5 years or 6 years or so. And then we did some maneuverings of our legal entities at Alliance Franchise Brands, and we put our print division, which is based out of Michigan, together with our sign division. And so we eliminated the need to have two presidents or two VPs of marketing. And so anyway, I took over the printing brands, and you mentioned Allegra Marketing, Print Mail is one of them. That's our largest. And we have KKP Printing and Insti Prints and American Speedy Printing as well. And so anyway, a couple of years of bringing two marketing teams together and marketing processes together. And then we did a reorg almost 2 years ago to then bring in a couple other marketing functions, further consolidate them. So we had purchased a brand in the last several years called RSVP, Direct Mail Advertising. And then we also have been incubating a brand the last couple of years called True Install. And then the function for the sales of franchises also got moved under my wing or so. And we had some other executive leadership changes as well that took place in this most recent reorganization. So anyway, we've got about nearly 20 or so in-house marketing team members and a roster of outside providers, a lot of different software that we use. And that's how we go to market to grow our brands, protect our brands, and generate leads for our franchise members, because they're all B2B franchises.
You've been there about 9 years now, so it sounds like there has been a lot of changes that you've managed through, reorgs, team changes, building systems. Like, if you look back, what do you think are some of the key components when you're folding in a new brand or reorging? Like, what advice would you give for others undergoing that? Because I know I've been through a few acquisitions and they can be rough.
Yeah, sometimes they can. The good thing with us at Alliance is we have a really strong culture to start with. You know, the marketing teams and the other functional teams that existed in the Michigan office versus the Maryland office, there was always a lot of camaraderie and esprit de corps, and the goals were all the same. It wasn't a super difficult process in bringing together the team. Now, we did have agencies, new agencies coming into the fold, and we had different marketing platforms that were used between the two groups. But Probably a good thing that I learned is really the importance of listening and seeing where the brands are at before making any substantial changes to what's going on. So basically, get good input from your team and other stakeholders, internal and external. Watch how it goes for a little bit, and then be ready to make some swift moves. And if you make a mistake along the way, and I don't think that we did, but if you did, it's usually something that can be fixed, put back into place, or somehow else rectified.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, I think that culture piece that you mentioned is super important because it's almost as long as you have the right team and mindset that can work together, you can tackle anything that's needed for those swift decisions and bridging the different system gaps and all those things that need to come together. But it's almost like merging of two different families. Like each family has their different values or like different way of nuanced of doing things. And then when you're trying to merge the family into one and be a cohesive unit, like it takes some learning process and like getting to know each other and having those aligned values. I know that people piece is really important too.
Yeah, and what's important to remember that you may not be doing everything as well as you think you are when you compare it to another brand group in our particular case, or let's say if one was bringing a brand in from the outside, and we did do that, is to pause and reflect, have an open mind about what your current thoughts and feelings and programs and procedures are before you discount what has been done previously. Yeah, it's always good to listen and learn, reflect, and then move quickly to find efficiencies and improvements and the best path forward.
Yeah. And I'm curious, you mentioned systems and mixing and repuzzling some of those things. What did it look like when you came in 9 years ago versus where are you guys at today and looking to in the future?
Yeah, when I came in, I would say that the marketing team was wearing a lot of hats. And I'll give you an example of that. So we had brand managers that were in place for, let's say, Science by Tomorrow, Science Now, Image 360, and they were handling not only the, what I'll call customer service or interaction with our franchise members and helping them, but they were doing things like social media marketing themselves for their brand and email marketing, for example, for their brand. So I instituted a hybrid system of brand management, like consumer packaged goods type brand management setup, and then a marketing services setup. So almost like an internal agency. And we hired along the way specialists in things like social media marketing and email marketing. One person or a team of a couple people handling that function for all of the brands. So there was great efficiencies that came into play and expertise based on job specialization. So we've really found that's the best way for us to operate, with captains of brands that tap internal services and external services from partners in order to go to market with the best foot forward for their respective brands. So that was one of the biggest things I think that comes to mind, and just really adding people and taking in functions that we had with agencies. I think we were a little bit maybe too reliant on our agencies, and we needed to set certain things in place, in place ourselves from a brand standpoint, and then get our agencies to come along with the direction that we put in place. So that was probably another thing that we did that was critical to our success.
Yeah, and we hear of a lot of portfolio and platform companies who build that internal services. And so I'm curious for you guys, when you have that brand quarterback and then the internal services team, like where does the ownership lie for spearheading everything? Is it truly with the internal services who roll up to reporting to you? Like, how do you structure that ownership?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, you're asking how do we as an internal team determine how our various platforms or providers can complement each other to put the best foot forward for our brands?
Yeah, almost just like a little bit more tactically, how do you guys do that? Because I hear of a lot of people either attempting to do it and failing because it's really hard to get those internal resources with the right skill set or get everything stitched together, and you're trying to figure out the build buyer partner. And so just curious a little bit more about how you guys have that structured to drive the initiatives needed.
I think, like others, there are some intricacies that don't always go the way that you envision them when you put them together on paper. And one of the things that I've been most recently working on is restructuring all the roles within the marketing team to create better boundaries between what the brand managers, for example, are responsible for. At what point in a process do they then turn the ball over to another internal team member to carry that ball forward? And how does the brand management team get brought in at the right checkpoints along the way when a process is being implemented by an internal team member? So I think improved definition of the roles of our kind of internal agency folks along with our brand management folks has really helped our processes move forward, and I think creates more job satisfaction too for the team members when they know that where their boundaries lie, and where to push and where not to push, where to be brought into, and when to just have faith that the good people that you work with will move that ball forward.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of portfolio. It's interesting when you're a brand marketer of a single brand, single franchise brand, your life is different than if you're a brand marketer of a multi-location brand without the franchisee aspect. And then if you're a part of a portfolio company, it's different than a regular like single brand. And I know in your experience, you started at Domino's way back in the day, and that was your first foray into franchising, and then Rite Aid. So you've run the gamut. So I do want to touch on Domino's in a second, but with that backdrop, I'm curious if there was some other brand marketer who was a part of a single brand getting acquired into a platform company or starting that journey of that portfolio of brands under their wing, what advice would you give them if it's their first time experience going from a single to platform company?
I would say you got to be really careful about the target audiences and the personas of the brands if they're in competing categories. That can truly be a challenge. So I think that spending some good upfront time and energy on your target markets and clearly defining them is very critical so that you're not stepping on the other brand by mistake. And you mentioned a couple other companies that I worked for. I also worked in the brewing business for the Stroh Brewing Company, and we had a lot of brands that did overlap, whether they were regional brands or whether they were national brands, but they hit the same drinker profiles. And so it was really important to find the true essence of the brands and then the path forward tactically and thematically that really resonated with the core drinkers of those brands. So I would want people to know to be real tight with the brand essence and the target markets to be sure that there's not overlap. And as I said earlier, be sure to listen and understand what had been taking place prior to the receipt of that brand into your portfolio to be sure that you're not too quick to make a move on something that might have some really good value in how it was being executed previous to you taking control of the brand.
Yeah. And what do you guys look at when it comes to that specific overlap? And I know that, for example, within the digital marketing world on our end, like one thing is if you have a similar ideal customer, then understanding the specific niche and the keyword demand, the journey, the different types of questions that could infuse that thematic type thing that you were talking about, and topics that you can own and dominate versus competitors to make your differentiators sing. I'm curious what specific things that come to mind when you were looking at that overlap and how to then well define the audience segments to understand how to approach each and not waste money basically going after.
Yeah, it's difficult. I got to say, it's not always a science in determining how to manage the brands so that they don't step on each other. And there are instances where, as much as you can define the themes and define the keywords, sometimes there just is overlap. People can behave differently in different situations, and may find that one of your brands is a solution this time, but it might not be a solution another time. So I'm not really able to provide a real strong formula for how to handle brands when they, overlap fairly sizably. So
Yeah, and I think you're right in terms of sometimes you just have to be finding the person which could have multiple brands solving their problem. So then it's also on the back end. That's something that we also see is being able to better harness data and use insights from the various brands to either cross promote, or at the end of the day, it's like celebrate because you captured the person you want to. Now, what do you do with it? Like you can retarget them with different things, you can remarket to them, but it depends on that data you're collecting so that you can understand that acquisition and what the right next step for that person may be.
yeah. And who's done a remarkable job of that from my perspective as an outsider, but yet looking at them as a fellow franchisor, is Neighborly Brands, where they have so many brands that go for the same target market. And several years ago, they stepped away as a company to really realize that Neighborly owned the customer, and that each of their brands had an opportunity to refer in other brands in their portfolio. And so they go to market, as best I can tell, is from a brand specific standpoint, but also holistically as a service provider to customers. Pretty interesting how they pivoted there several years ago. And hopefully it's going when their franchisees don't think somehow that they're not getting enough attention with their individual brand.
Yeah, and I like to think of them as the branded house versus house of brands, where you're branding Neighborly. And I'm even thinking this week, I literally got a direct flyer from Neighborly, and it said Neighborly can solve XYZ, and then had 3 of their brand logos there. So it's like that is the branded house they're going to market with. And then on the flip side, you've got authority brands where they're really pushing branding of each individual brand. So it's a house of brands versus the branded house approach. And they have those 2 different ways of going to market, which I think both have their pros and cons with them as well.
Yeah. And with us having brands that directly compete in the same space, if we have locations in the same market, Image 360 signs now and signs by tomorrow, it does create challenges for us when we want to communicate similar messages using even similar mediums, where we have to sound different, we have to look different, even though we may be saying sometimes similar messages to our customers. But we never reveal that we have 3 brands in the market if all 3 do exist in one market at the same time.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, you also mentioned B2B leads, which I have to say I'm specifically passionate about, being a part of a B2B company myself, but then I also help other B2B marketers and B2C marketers as well. So I'm curious what you guys are seeing right now in terms of strategies and tactics that are working for you guys on that front.
Yeah, as I always tell our franchise members, whether they be new franchisees coming into training or existing, it's never one thing that you can do to generate leads and communicate with your customers, but having a message that is common, that is delivered at the same time through multiple mediums is super important. And when you're running a large organization, like we have, with a lot of different communication touch points and a lot of entities involved in delivering those touch points and creating those messages, it's really important that the message is consistent at the same time. That's a big challenge, just to get that together and have it delivered at the right time by everyone in a coordinated fashion. But as far as lead generation goes, sometimes you think Facebook, being more of a consumer-oriented platform, doesn't have a play with B2B, but it in fact does have a B2B play in there, because as part of the day we wear our business hats, and the other part of the day we're regular people doing regular things. And it's important to realize that in some of these social media platforms like Instagram, for example, for us, we have very visual brands, being in the visual communications industry. So opportunities that we have to show our stuff, whether it's our websites and the latest completed projects that a franchise member does and uploads to their version of our brand sites, or whether it's Facebook, as I mentioned, or certainly LinkedIn has a lot of value, and email marketing and so forth. It takes a lot of touch points to break through the clutter, and it's marketers and companies don't have the same power that they did back when I was at Domino's, or even when I was in the beer business or with Rite Aid, where you pushed a lot of messages and you intercepted people in their paths. Now we still do that in the daily paths that people walk when they're wearing their business hat or their consumer hat. But yeah, control has shifted to the receivers of messages, because they can go out and find messages. So you got to play both games, inbound and outbound marketing.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what are you guys seeing on the number of touch points, or just ballpark guess of touch points that's needed to get in front of and convert a prospect? There's always the rule of thumb that's 10, but I'm curious if you guys have any data or actually insight into what you would say that you're seeing these days.
Yeah, we always say 9 to 13 from our metrics is what we look to hammer out there. And some of our products have longer life cycles in terms of purchase cycles, I should say. For signage, somebody might be in the market maybe only a couple times a year, depending on the size of the project. Other sign customers may be in monthly if they're of a certain type, retailers, for example. Anyway, yeah, you got to be factoring in the purchase cycle into the message frequency strategy.
Yeah, and mapping that digital journey to that cycle. I have to remind marketers all the time, just to your point of talking about Meta and Facebook, it's like, oh yeah, people like B2B brands don't think that they should be there. And it's, how about just be everywhere that your customer is? Let's reverse engineer it. Let's figure out where they are and then get in front of them. And I guarantee you, wherever they are is the great place to be. And you just need to ensure that you have the right message for the context of that experience. If you're cruising Instagram, you can't flash them with something incredibly boring that won't capture their attention or be a reminder. You have to remember the context of how they're using that platform in it.
Exactly. And we've all heard and we all know, and we probably all don't use it as much as we should, but video. It's just such a great way to communicate with B2B target audiences and B2C target audiences as well. So that's something that we've looked to continue to invest in and use more of.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious for you guys, how do you produce that actual content? There's so many tools for just marketers like us to do it ourselves. You could use really professional studio producers. Where do you guys fall in the mix and how you produce your videos?
Yeah, we use a mix of very professional video providers, and we've used some, I'm going to say maybe mid-range or so, those kind of cartoonish style videos. And then we also have internal creative tools like Canva, for example, that we'll use to create very simple videos. And sometimes we'll do the filming ourselves. Our social media people or other people will have opportunities to be interacting with a franchise member at their location, or maybe even on a customer job where, back to the signage example again, when signage is getting installed, it can be a pretty neat thing in a time-elapsed fashion. So we get our video from a lot of different sources, and I think each has its value too, right? The really complex high-end video has great value, but then sometimes the real down and dirty real video has tremendous value as well, because people see it truly for what it is, and it has a lot of believability.
Yeah, just very authentic. What other trends are you seeing right now then do you think marketers should be aware of? Sounds like video's one. Anything else that's top of mind for you guys?
Yeah, everybody talks about AI, and of course, we are using AI in a number of ways right now and are looking to learn more about it as well. And we're trying to educate our franchisees about how to use it. I have seen some studies, and one several weeks ago, that actually mimicked some of the results that we fielded a similar study at the end of 2022, but about the increasing use that printing in general has seen a large decline over the last 20 years or so. But there is a bit of a resurgence going on with print because of its tactile value, and then also the use of direct mail. We've seen more B2B marketers and B2C marketers embracing that because it's different. It used to be junk mail, and now with the frequency down there, and as you can see, I continue to fight the sun coming in here from my blinds, but yeah. But anyway, that's a trend that we've seen. Back to AI, I think it's going to have a big impact on search, and that's something that's been concerning to me with all of our SEO work that we do. Just knowing that we've got another little trick play coming in, so to speak, with AI delivering up different results than the normal search that we have been positioning ourselves for. So those are a couple of things. And it's funny that QR codes and flow codes have come back again into some style as they were several years ago. And another thing I think too, especially for B2B marketers, is integrating websites with CRMs and the MIS or the POS system, especially in the multi-location and franchising world. You're trying to get those three platforms to all play nice together is a challenge, I think, for people in the industry. I think everyone's trying to move closer toward clarity because of its impact for measuring return on investment and customer experience. But that's one thing that's been a challenge for us, because we have purchased brands over time, and those brands come with their legacy MIS systems, for example, and trying to corral our franchisees into a common MIS or POS system is something that we are continuing to work on.
Yeah, is that your guys' approach then, is try to get them transferred on to an existing one that you guys have for easier integration? I see it both ways. either let them live what they're doing and then you get fragmented systems everywhere, or you have almost like that onboarding playbook internally of the transition to a new POS and back-end system. What's your guys' approach?
Yeah, we're pretty spread out on it. Internally at AFB, if you ask us, we would ideally like to have everybody on one or two different POS/MIS systems, but we haven't, I'm going to say, strongly pressured our franchise members to go to the preferred platforms that we have. As we do in our company, we have franchise members that choose over time to convert to our larger brands. Our Allegra Marketing Print Mail is our largest print brand. Image 360 is our largest signage brand. And over time, we've had franchisees from the other brands in those groupings look to transition. And as part of the transition, in most cases, we require them moving to a particular POS system. So it's with a long-term goal that we have done when there's an ownership change or a brand change where we look to press on a conversion to a preferred POS/MIS system.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the MarTech space and just systems and tools in general, it's like the amount of tools out there continues to grow. So that at one time you have like this fragmentation of a bunch of different stuff happening, but at the same time you have the trend of trying to have more of these things being interconnected and integrated, like you were saying. So it's like, if all else fails, get the foundation of your house talking to each other, the website, CRM, POS. I fully believe you can do anything in the world if you had that foundation buttoned up. Everything else from there could be gravy if you just have that digital attribution loop at play.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough challenge to have all of the tech stack all be together under a single platform and have all of the components be the best components that you can find. It seems often that when tech companies try and bring so much functionality into one overall platform, something gives a little bit in a lot of cases. Maybe your CRM isn't as good, or let's say it's your social media platform that's built in. Maybe that isn't quite as good as you might want it to be. Yeah, there's always trade-offs, but I think as time goes on, as you said, we're getting closer and closer to a real strong and very robust integrated tech stack.
Yeah, we're all hoping.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to touch base on where your career started at Domino's. It's such an epic and iconic brand. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about your time there and lessons learned that kind of helped propel you into the career you've had today.
Yeah. What kind of comes to mind, I was there during the real rapid growth and started out as a regional marketing manager. I got out of grad school overseeing the mid-Atlantic area. And so we were proliferating regional offices because the company had about 30% of its locations were company owned. And there was several reasons for having an important regional focus. And we got up to 16 regional offices in the US at one time. So anyway, being grounded and close to franchise members when you're in a regional marketing role, I found was very helpful when I got promoted to oversee all of field marketing, but just through other roles I had, like director of national advertising and director of marketing at Domino's, where to stay close to the franchisee, because a lot of great product innovation can come from franchise members. And I can remember the cries for diversification of menu. And at that time, Domino's was 2 sizes of pizza. And originally, when I started at Domino's, it was just classic Coke, and that was it. You couldn't even get Diet Coke because we didn't want to complicate our systems. these were some of the rules that we had. But eventually, with listening to franchise members, we did diversify and created a whole new concept called Domino's Pizza Pizzazz that served single serve pizzas, which we called Zingles, double Z, kind of a play off pizza. And then we had breakfast pizzas, Piz-Ams. We had Zalids with double Z, and just a wide variety of products that led to the foundation of the product diversification and how Domino's was transitioning themselves from a pizza delivery company to a meal delivery company. Again, listening to franchisees fueled product development. There are other voices from the field that came to me about, we're not addressing the Latino audience in the States. And so anyway, I ended up starting a Hispanic marketing program, and which was very, very successful. And Domino's ended up way over indexing, as we were really the first pizza chain that really spoke to that audience the way that they needed to be spoken to. Listening to customers about who their market is, what products that they think that should be delivered. Those are a few learnings that I recall from Domino's, just in addition just to the whole system of franchising, which I was exposed to, which is really an amazing concept, really, franchising, leveraging people's drives and their capital to expand a brand concept. Is pretty amazing. So those are a few things that come to mind.
And that hit home, the kind of menu expansion really hits home for me, because I normally am not someone who wants to order pizza, but their thin crust is so good that I will order Domino's pizza. They're nailing it even today. And it's interesting because you want to nail your niche and be not everything to everyone. But when you can cater and capture more market with people who would normally not order pizza like me, nailed it again because of you listening to franchisees.
Yeah. And one thing that was really smart, that I think the current CEO of Domino's led this campaign, but, and I'm sure I'll be wrong on the timing of it. It was sometime in 2005-ish or something when Domino's came out and basically said, our pizza isn't that good. We've let you down. We're totally overhauling our pizza. Yeah. Give us another chance. And maybe that's when they picked you up as a lapsed customer, or maybe. But anyway, that was a real smart and aggressive and risky strategy that really paid out well for the Domino's brand.
Agree. And one more thing that I want to make sure I ask you about, because it sounded super cool when we touched base on it earlier, was you also took over the Fran Dev side of the house as well. It sounds like in the past year or so, and it sounds like you guys have a very cool program that's been moving the needle for you guys on that side. So I was curious if you could talk more about that Matchmaker program.
Yeah, the Matchmaker program is pretty cool. Is when we come across a prospective franchise member who falls in love with one of our brands, and we're unable to maybe franchise in a certain area due to the territory being filled up, or if they wanted a existing business and we didn't have a current franchisee that was looking to exit their business, we would then actually go out and find an independent business and then put those two together, hence Matchmaker, and then the independent brand would eventually be converted into one of our brands with that prospect turned into a current owner. So yeah, that's our Matchmaker program, and it's pretty great. It's pretty great for somebody to come into a business and not have to start from the ground up. Now, it may require more capital, but not always, to purchase an existing business. And the value to Alliance Franchise Brands is we get a new location that's got ongoing revenue right out of the gate at a higher level than if you were starting from base zero with what we call a greenfield franchise, is a start from zero.
Yeah, that sounds like a win. Coming up, I've got one more question for you, which is there any questions that I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
Now, that is a good question. How can people find out about all the good podcasts that you have put together? What's an easy way for them to find some of your great content?
I love it. You can go to netsertive.com, and in the navigation, we have a drop down for podcasts that will host your wonderful face and our whole, trying to think back on how many years we've been doing this now, maybe 2 or 3. So there's 3 years worth of awesome franchise marketers and executive leaders like you guys all housed on that page. Or you can check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're available on the Art of Franchise Marketing as well, if you're audio booking on the go and listening to a podcast. I appreciate that answer. No one's thrown that one in before. Thank you so much for joining, Burke. This was so much fun. Love talking with you, and thanks for the audience for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to The Art of Franchise Marketing. This show is brought to you by netsertive. We help franchise brands and multi-location businesses run localized digital marketing at scale. To learn more, visit netsertive.com.